This is my knot board, and I'm Jacob Chandler. This is part of my Scout project, with the Scout theme for my Imagination Station, and this is one of the three. You can see here I have 4 different categories of knots, with their purposes listed. The first category I have knots that join ropes. The first one is the square knot, or the reef knot. It is your basic knot for joining 2 ropes of similar diameter, or thickness, you might say. And this is the first one that we learned in Boy Scouts. You can see here how the ends both come off onto the right side of the knot, and that is important technically for the knot. The next one here is the liar's knot. This is, I guess you'd say, a modification of the square knot. Now you can see here how one little arm comes off on the left and one arm comes off on the right. That makes it different from this square knot where you see both arms come off to the right. And the difference that it makes is that the liar's knot, whenever you put it under tension, it slips out. Even though it looks like a square knot, which is very sturdy, this one will slip. The next one we have is the granny knot. See here? It may not look similar to the square knot, but in fact, it is the easiest, most easily confused knot with the square knot whenever you tie it. Because it's almost identical to tie, except for the second step. And there's only 2 steps for tying the knot. And if you mess it up, you get the granny knot. It'll slip after a while, but it'll still hold. It'll hold better than the liar's knot. Next knot we have is the sheet bend. Now you can see here I have 2 different ropes of different thicknesses. Alright, and you see how the thicker rope, it only does a little curve here. It doesn't do any of the finite turnings as this little rope does. The sheet bend, as you can see, is used for joining 2 different ropes, as I said, of different thicknesses. You may come across it in Scouts or whatnot. You need to use a sheet bend for this. It's not always the sturdiest knot, but it's the best for this situation. The next knot we have is the carrick bend. And carrick, not like the vegetable, but like this. Alright, I have it expanded like this to show you how the inner workings of it are. But this knot is used to join 2 really large ropes, such as these. It's a common sailor knot, in that they use thick ropes, and this is the knot they use to join them. Now this is not what it looks like whenever it's pulled tight, but I did it this way so that way you can see what the innards of it are. Next type of knots that we have are knots made that make loops. Right. First one we have is the bowline. The bowline loop, or bowline knot, the loop it makes is very sturdy. It never loosens or tightens. And so once you tie it, this is pretty much how big the loop is going to be and how small it's going to be for a while. Even if you pull on it, even if it gets wet, all the above, it's going to stay like that. So it's a good sturdy knot. The next knot we have is the rescue bowline. It is very much similar to the bowline, except that you can see it has 2 different loops. And the loops you'd use to as a makeshift cradle to pull someone out of a, say, gorge or out of the water. They'd run a loop behind the shoulders and the other behind their legs, and to be able to act as a cradle to pull someone out. The next knot we have is the figure 8 loop. It's a pretty standard loop. You don't have to use either end of the rope to tie this loop. Next one we have is the butterfly loop. It is just like, or well, almost just like the figure 8 loop. So you can see they look pretty much the same, and they do the same job. It's really just a matter of preference. Next knot we have is the lasso knot, or the Honda knot. And as you can tell by the name, it's the knot that you use on a lasso. So imagine this being a little lasso and this being the knot that slides on it, okay? Finally, for this row we have the sheep shank. This isn't so much a loop as a knot that you use to take out the slack in a rope. And say if you have 3 or 4 feet of slack in the rope that you don't need, and also you don't have access to the ends, you'd use the sheep shank to take up all the extra slack. And another interesting thing about the sheep shank is that once you relieve pressure on either end, like if you untie it, the sheep shank will come loose very quickly. And so this has to stay under tension. Whereas if you'd use the figure 8 lube just to take up slack, once this gets pulled on, it gets tightened up, it's a little bit hard to actually undo it after a while. But the sheep shank comes loose pretty easy. Third types of knots that we have are special knots. They are, well, rather miscellaneous ones. But the first one we have is your standard paracord braid. So like you see on all the popular bracelets, this is what that one looks like. The other one is the cobra braid. It's another popular one. It's just a little bit different in the way it looks. Alright. Third we have is the monkey fist. Most popular use nowadays is to use it as a keychain. They have different sizes, of course, depending on what kind of rope you use, but it was originally used as a weight to tie on the end of a rope, to throw it, say, over a limb or something of that sort. It's very complicated to tie, so it's not very practical other than aesthetics. Next knot we have is the overhand knot. I'll try to show you. Yeah, that's about as simple of a knot as you can ever get. Next knot we have is the figure 8 knot. It is probably the second most simple knot you could ever have. See, it's just a little bit different than the overhand. Alright. The next style of knots that we have are hitches. Now, hitches are used to tie a rope onto a post in some form or fashion. First one we have are the 2-half hitches. Now, you may wonder why they don't just call it a hitch, instead of saying 2 half hitches, but that's just the style of it. A hitch is actually a little different than 2 half hitches. So anyway, this is what 2 half hitches looks like, and this will slide, like it will loosen and it will tighten, and that's the way it's designed to. See, this rope right here, it slides like in this fashion within the rope, and see, I'm kind of loosening it, then you can tighten it like this. Alright. Another version of it is the taut line. The taut line works just the same, except it has a bit more friction, and you use it more to secure things, whereas 2 half hitches is mainly just to help take up slack at the end of a rope. Alright, we have the midshipman's hitch, and you that are looking at the board can probably see that it looks almost identical to the taut line. And in fact, it is almost identical, except that you see here how the arm and the other arm come out of different sides, whereas on here, both arms, ignore this green rope, where both arms come out on the same side, right beside each other. That is the key difference between these two. And because of this difference, it gives the midshipman's hitch a lot more friction in order to grip onto the post and grip onto the rope. So if you're in a scenario where you need more friction, more grip, you'd use the midshipman's hitch versus the taut line. Alright, the third hitch that we have is the clove hitch. It is a pretty basic knot. You use it for tying lashings, like to start off with. Some people also use it to tie up their horses, though I personally don't recommend it because it comes loose pretty easy if the horse pulls on it. A better version of the clove hitch is the constrictor knot, and as you look at the board, you can probably see it's very similar, except that this stays on it and doesn't come loose just quite as easy. Okay. Next we have the cow hitch. Whereas the overhand knot and the figure 8 knot are the two easiest knots, this is the easiest hitch. You see, you just run the loop around the post and then you pull the 2 ends through it. Some people also call it a lark's head. Next one we have is the timber hitch. This knot is used to pull logs and such. Say if you're cutting up firewood, you would use this to tie up to the log and pull it. this is the standing end. The standing end is the end of the rope that you do not need to tie the knot. It is mainly what is being tied around, you might say. So this is a standing end here. The working end wraps around itself, making little spirals that act as teeth or grips into the post. And if this was log, it would make a lot of friction with the bark, and therefore giving it a lot of bite in order to help you pull it. And this right here, in case you were wondering, those that are keen-eyed, this is a hitch. Lastly, we have the pile hitch. Pile hitch is used, though this isn't a good demonstration of it, is used to tie a continuous loop onto a post that has an exposed end, like say at the end of a broom handle, that kind of a post. And the kind of loop that you would have would be, say, imagine a belt that is connected, or a rubber band that's really long. That would be the kind of the style of rope that you're tying onto this kind of post. Now, of the uses, there's not many besides merely fastening it to the post in a quick fashion. Lastly, we have the distal hitch. Now this is rather unique in that it is used for climbing, like climbing mountains and trees and bridges and all that crazy stuff. And it acts like an anchor point onto a rope. Whenever you say this carabiner clip is hooked to a climber, when he pulls on it, it makes a lot of friction on this rope, and so therefore acts as an anchor point. But you can still slide it with a gentle pressure. Slide it like this. But whenever, say, you're like, it acts as a safety measure or safety stop. So if you fall and put a lot of pressure onto it, it holds tight. So there are some different versions of this, and some people prefer other knots for that instance, but this is the basic use of the distal hitch.